and protecting God's creation. Why did I have to kill a tree to print out a 5-page curriculum vitae here? That's a long one.
You just pulled a couple of notes off.
That's what I did. That's what I did. But anyways, let me introduce one of my bosses, Father Ken Schmidt. He's our speaker today. He's currently the pastor of St. Catherine of Siena's, and previously, for 20 years, he was the pastor of St. Tom's. He has 4 advanced degrees, including a PhD in canon law and a master's in counseling psychology. Number 3, he is a licensed professional counselor, and he also is the co-founder of and executive director of Trauma Recovery Associates. And the trauma recovery, I think, is what he's very well known for, both nationally and internationally. I counted, I think, over 40 publications, including, I think, a couple books, Father? Yep. On trauma recovery and related issues, and over 120 presentations that he's given over the years, a lot of them on trauma recovery, but also other subjects. So I believe he's going to speak to us today about counseling skills. Is that correct, Father?
Yep.
Okay, so my pastor, Father Ken Schmidt.
So this is really for you today, okay? I mean, I already know this stuff, so I don't need to say it, right? I mean, I've heard it before. It's nice to review it. It's good reminders for me. So I tried to come up with some topics that I think are more pertinent rather than, I mean, you kind of get the general introduction to counseling, you know, listening, reflecting skills, that sort of thing. So I tried to come up with 4 topics that I thought were more likely, or at least in my experience, seem to be emerging more, and that we could maybe use some help with. But if you want to raise something else, I can shoot from the hip and see what happens, all right? But the 4 that I wanted to at least raise were domestic abuse, suicide, trauma, specifically childhood trauma, and sexual orientation. Are those okay? Do you want to raise some other ones? Okay. All right, here we go. So basically, I'm thinking that in general, I'm presuming that deacons are more in the position of doing crisis intervention or kind of spot counseling, ad hoc counseling, as opposed to you're not going to meet with someone for 6 months every week, right? That's not general. There may be someone here who has that training, that's great. But I'm speaking more in terms of crisis intervention. Someone comes in, they call you up and you don't even know what it's going to be, right? Can I come in and talk to you? And you're going to sit down and then you find out, right? They probably don't even tell you over the phone, especially if it's some kind of crisis or something that's more personal. You know, they're not going to blurt that out over the phone. They're just going to say something like, I want to come and talk to you. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of define, not because everybody has to fit it or not fit it, but because I think it's an issue in itself, and that's when someone calls in and they have a crisis. And so it'll usually be like, I need to meet with you as soon as possible, right? It's not like, could we figure something out in the next month or so? It's like, something's come up and I really need with you. At least they're experiencing it as a crisis. So I'm going to kind of define that a little bit, but also help you work your way through that, because sometimes what's their crisis isn't your crisis, okay? So 1, sudden onset. So it just happened, all right? So they're stirred up, they're emotional, it's big, it feels big to them, they don't know what to do, they've kind of looked around, they can't figure it out, so they need to get some help, okay? Almost always, we don't get help because we think it's a good idea, we get help because we can't think of what else to do, right? Or we've tried everything that we already know how to do on our own, and so then we ask for help. So now they're calling you for help. So sudden onset, sometimes without warning, all right? It can be related to issues of loss frequently, and I'm using loss in the broadest sense of the word. So they might have lost a relationship, but it could be the end of a friendship, or some dream that they had, hope that they had, thinking of how their life is going to go. Could be that they've lost an object, all right, that was important to them, and they're experiencing loss. So loss can be big, but intense feelings goes with it. And sometimes even perceived or experienced as almost life-threatening. They probably wouldn't say that in those words, and they probably wouldn't even say it if challenged that way, but the way they're experiencing it is, this is really big and really serious, and I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I can survive this. Okay? If you said literally, do you think you'll survive this? Well, yeah. But that's not how it's experienced with the intensity of the feelings. And so they're seeking help. The way I want to distinguish this is just because it's big, and just because it's emotional, and just because they're perceiving it a certain way, doesn't mean it truly is a crisis. All right? They're experiencing it as a crisis, and the reason I'm saying that is because you may kind of get pulled into that and therefore think that you have to give up your family event or cancel your vacation or change your whole schedule around in order to respond to their crisis, which may not be a crisis. So I'm going to give you an example of that. It's probably an extreme example, but that's the way it goes. So this woman calls in. She's very upset on the phone. She is crying very heavily, and she thinks that her marriage is about to end. Okay, and that is serious. I'm not saying that that's not serious. And it's there. She needs to meet with me as soon as possible. Okay? Because of what's just happened. And I'm looking at my schedule for the next couple of days and going, yeah, it's not going to be easy. I mean, it really would require me moving people around, canceling something in order for her to come in because she needs to see me as soon as possible. But within a couple of questions, she starts to say what has happened, whatever it was. And I said, how long has this been going on? And she said, 25 years. That's what said to me, this isn't a crisis, okay? Was she feeling emotional turmoil? Yes. What I spent some time on the phone doing was helping her to calm down, to say that you're going to be able to survive this. We'll find some time to do this, but it's not going to happen right now. And I didn't say to her, this isn't the crisis you think it is. But in my head, that's what I was saying, right? It was her emotional turmoil. It was her distress. I need to respond to that immediately. But I didn't have to cancel everything else in order to do that. And then it was fine. Come on in. So you hear a little bit of difference? Just to give you an alert sometimes that just because someone wants something or they perceive it as a crisis doesn't mean it really is. And you have permission to discern that a little bit and make a decision for yourself instead of thinking, okay? And you also have all that other stuff that goes with family and spouses and everything else, you know, other commitments and priorities in your life that don't allow you just to drop things immediately like some people might want. So some crisis topics are things like abuse, certainly safety, if there's domestic abuse going on. That's basically what I'm talking about at this moment about abuse. Suicide is certainly a crisis, okay? When someone calls in and says, I'm thinking about killing myself, yeah, there's one, and we'll go into that more. Childhood trauma. Now, childhood trauma is and isn't. It is in the sense that if they're beginning or suddenly have learned or memories are emerging, you can have a lot of emotional turmoil that needs to be addressed, okay? On the other hand, you're not going to resolve childhood trauma because you met with them once, right? Okay? So there's an element of crisis or not. And sexual orientation, I'm talking both about the person who's discovering their own sexual orientation and whatever distress is going with that, but I'm, these days, probably having as much time that I'm spending with parents who are finding out about their child as I am talking with the person who's the child or the young adult who's exploring or figuring out their own orientation. So what are you going to do with that? So that's kind of where we're going. Remember, it's a crisis for the parishioner, even if you don't think it's a crisis for yourself, so we have to be able to respond to that. Confidentiality at that moment is not the key issue. If we're talking about saving someone's life, like when we're in a suicidal information, we're not worried about confidentiality, Okay, that's a place where it can be approached. When there's harm for themselves or harm for someone else, confidentiality kind of gets set aside carefully, but it gets set aside. And gives some help to calming the emotions, to letting know that they'll survive, that life will go on, that there's some help coming, that there's hope about the situation, that the crisis frequently fuels intense thinking, like I'm not going to survive this, or it will never be the same, my life has gone to hell, you know, I mean, that kind of extreme thinking. And what you can do, what all of us can do, is give hope. Okay? To give hope is incredibly important and is the one really good therapeutic thing that every person can do. And we know that that makes a difference. So I'm not just talking about, oh, that's nice, you gave him a little hope, you know, like a little pat on the back. No. Hope itself is therapeutic. People already begin to change and begin to resolve their own issues when they have hope, as opposed to hopelessness. This is lost, there's nothing I can do, there's no way I'm going to survive. There's a difference, okay? So giving hope is what we're in a position to do, okay? You can check for things when they're in crisis, and it's okay to ask these things directly, but you also may hear the answer without having to answer them directly. One is, are they suicidal? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about ending your life? Even though they've said words that say that, you have to listen carefully. So I can say, I just don't think life is worth living anymore. That doesn't mean I'm suicidal. Okay? So then you can say, well, having said that, are you thinking about ending your life? Oh, Father, I would never do that. I mean, that might be an answer you get. Or you might get, yeah, I've really been thinking about it. You know, I've even been thinking about how I can do it. Now you're in a different path. We're going to come back to this. Okay, so I'm not like leaving that. But do you hear the difference? Sometimes it's just the way I'm expressing myself. It's the way I'm expressing my emotion is to say, it feels like life isn't worth living, or I just don't know how I can go on. That might be an emotional expression, or it might be an expression of suicidality. No one, I know this is dangerous to say, no one's going to commit suicide because you raise the question. All right? All right? Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Not today.
Not today. Okay. All right. But did that make you think, well, gosh, now that he says that, maybe I should?
Maybe tomorrow.
Maybe tomorrow. So we don't have to be afraid of raising the question, because either they're going to say, no, that's not on my plate, that's not what I'm thinking about, I couldn't do that, or there's relief that they can talk about it because you just raised the topic. It's okay. All right?
Can I just add something?
Yes, yes.
Just in my experience, I'll hear that thought about suicide, and you'll hear how much they love somebody they're hoping to see next week, or they got to get to their shift, and then it's like, you know, you kind of know there's some future.
They're right. There's an orientation to the future, even though they just said this other thing.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to take it seriously. We don't want to be just dismissive. Yes?
We went through a real bad time with our son, and that was one of the things is he had planned on committing suicide.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry, I missed the verb. I heard the suicide, I didn't hear the verb.
he had planned.
He had planned. Okay, thank you.
To the point where I picked him up. He called me, and I picked him up, and he said, Dad, I'm going to do it. And I said, do what? He says, I'm going to commit suicide. And my first instinct was to stop him from talking, but it was almost like something told me not to. And he laid out what he had planned and detailed, all the way from slitting his wrists and hanging himself at the same time so that there wouldn't be a chance that he'd make it back. And it was horrifying for me as a father to sit there and listen to that. But I was told that that was one of the best things I could have done for him at that point, was let him talk that through. Is that true?
It's one of the pieces. One of the things that we want to do, we'll get to this more, is to simply keep them occupied with time. Suicide itself is considered to be an impulsive act in that you have to overcome deep, deep instincts for self-preservation in order to do something that's going to end your life, all right? So one of the ways that suicide hotlines work is you just keep talking to people. So about anything, right? To keep them busy. Now, he's also with you, so he can't do anything while he's with you. What happened from there?
Well, at that point, I drove him right to the emergency room.
Correct. Right. Then you get help. You're not in the position to do all the other things, but right. Right. But in the meantime, let him talk about it as opposed to, stop that, don't say that.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't get you very far. So thinking about crisis intervention, so I'm still in the generalities, even though I keep jumping around here. We're going to check about whether they're suicidal. We're going to check about whether they're homicidal, okay? So maybe my spouse just said they want a divorce. I'm not going to kill myself, I'm going to kill my spouse. All right, so we got to check for that, okay? We're going to check, are you thinking about hurting yourself, which isn't suicidal, okay? Some people do express their pain by cutting themselves or burning themselves, taking in stuff that's not good for their system, but it's not suicidal. Substance abuse, okay? Folks, if someone shows up and they're intoxicated or high, and you want to help them, you are wasting your time. Okay? You are wasting your time. And you got every good impulse in your heart to want to help them, and you are wasting your time. Which doesn't say that they're a waste of time, but you're wasting your time at that moment thinking that you're going to get through, you're going to have some impact, you're going to whatever, okay? So, when you're calmed down, when you're down, when you're not high, whatever, you can set an appointment with them, which they may or may not remember, so I suggest writing it down. I will be glad to see you and talk about what has brought you here, but I'm not going to talk to you now. Okay? So, it's okay. It's okay to do that. And it saves you from wasting your time. So psychological first aid, first of all, you're having contact with them. So you're doing your empathy, you're doing your reflective listening. Reflective listening includes both the facts or the content of what they're saying and the emotion of what they're saying. If you're just reflecting the facts, it's not enough. They're not going to feel heard. Okay, you got to reflect the emotion that's coming through. I just read a story. This was someone who was doing marriage, was trying to teach the husband in marriage counseling to have a better relationship with his wife. And the first piece of advice was to go home and really practice listening to your wife. And he comes back in a month and he says, I've really practiced that, and now I can really hear what she's saying. And then the person said, now I want you to go back home and I want you to practice listening to what she's not saying. Right? Both are there. Both are there. Okay. So, as you're doing this first aid, you're listening, you're reflecting, what's the problem? What's the event? What's the precipitating event? What has kicked this off? There might be a whole history, but why now is there this crisis? And why do they think they can't cope? Can you listen both for the weaknesses of why they're saying they can't cope, and you can also listen for what their strengths are? So, you would want to reinforce with the person, well, you've said that you want to end your life, but you've also, let me remind you how much you're looking forward to seeing so-and-so next week, and that they're expecting you at your job, and your kids are waiting for you to get home today because you're supposed to do this. So strengths and weaknesses is what you want to reflect back to them. You want to stay focused. Remember, we're in crisis intervention, okay? So you want to stay focused on the present and what you can do right now. Some of us, by personality, want to dig around and get all the history, right? Get it all explained so that we understand the whole thing. That's not the goal. The goal is not to finish this crisis intervention that you understand the whole thing, okay? The goal in the crisis intervention is to make sure that they're stable, that they're safe, and that they're ready to get help wherever that's going to be, whether it's coming back to you or referring them to somewhere else. So you stay focused on the present, and you look at some possible solutions. But you can only get to the solutions, you can only get to the problem-solving part after they believe they've been hurt. If you're trying to get to problem-solving and they haven't believed they've been hurt, they're just going to keep circling around and telling you the story because they don't feel like they've been heard yet. You got to be heard in order to begin to do the problem-solving. Because otherwise, from their point of view, how can you solve the problem when you don't even know what the problem is because you don't get it yet? Right? So you can look at what they have tried. You can look at what they think are the alternatives, and then you can add additional alternatives. And I'm going to tell you, this is a really common experience for me. So here's the situation A, and you say, so what can you do? And part of their dilemma may be, well, I can do this thing, which is really extreme, or I can do this thing. And neither one is palatable or workable or whatever. And they're stuck. Because I can do this thing, or I can do this thing. So they give you their alternatives. And then you can say, yeah, but you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this. Okay? And it doesn't even matter, truly, it doesn't even matter whether they're workable or the best or whatever. You're breaking them out of this sort of extreme thinking, this black and white thinking sometimes. You're breaking them out of that to begin to look more creatively at the situation and what's possible instead of just two things. So even if you put them down and they're crazy, they're not workable, they couldn't do it themselves, whatever it is, they begin to see the situation in a broader way than just in the black and white extreme. So their alternatives, your alternatives, and you may have to come back because they may immediately go, and then they're stuck back again in their two alternatives, which doesn't help them. So you may come back to their sense of hopelessness. Okay? They're kind of throwing up their hands. So it may circle around a little bit. And then you can begin to explore what is positive and what are barriers for each of the options. Can you figure out a concrete next step? Whether that's just going home and getting some rest, making a phone call, whatever it is, and then what's the plan for follow-up? Are they going to get a referral? How are you going to check in with them? Try to make it as concrete as possible. In your particular role, you should be careful. Here's some guidelines. Be careful not to judge or take sides. There's nothing like listening to one side of a marriage counseling relationship and you've heard how terrible the other person is and you're totally siding with the spouse and then you hear the other side. Right? So that gets you into trouble if you've already sided with one. So you can listen and you can be empathic, remembering they're telling you their perception and their experience. Right? So yes, empathy's fine, but to take their side, be careful not to get caught. Because you get, it's called triangle, so you have spouse 1 and spouse 2, and they're having the difficulty, and now you get into it as the deacon, and you know who becomes the problem in the relationship? You! Right? And your stupid piece of advice that they followed is now a great way for them not to deal with their problem, because we got another problem, and that's that stupid advice that the deacon gave us, which we followed and it didn't work. Okay? And that helps them in their minds, because now we got another direction to look at instead of paying attention to what's going on between us. It's called triangulation.
Yeah.
Yes?
One of the things I've been doing for years, and I think I got it from the dad, when I hear somebody split up, I call the person that didn't hear.
Okay.
And just say, understand you have some problems, I can help, just like, I don't know what's going on, but if you want to call.
So the presumption is you've heard from one of the parties, and then you make a contact with the other party.
Just say you need what happened.
Well, and it lets them know, the other thing that it serves as a purpose is it lets them know that you know. Because part of it is, they're wandering around, they don't know who knows now, right? Now they know you know. That opens the door. Okay? Big flag. We should be careful not to avoid danger signs that we're seeing or intense feelings that are being expressed because it makes us uncomfortable. Now that's easy to say, all right? But that's really where we can begin to interfere. That we're not allowing them to get out or to deal with whatever they need to deal with because of our own discomfort. So if you're a person, for example, that as soon as someone starts to cry, you're whipping out the box of Kleenex and handing them a Kleenex, your message to them, whether you think it is or not, is don't cry. Okay? Don't feel sad in front of me. I don't want to hear, I don't want to see that. Okay? That's not helping them. There's tissues there if you need them. Okay? I'm not talking about you withhold the tissues and hide them. You just sit there and cry. Okay, I'm talking about, as soon as it happens, here, I mean, we're giving them a message that it's not, I don't want to see these feelings. I don't want to hear this stuff. Okay? And they'll be very sensitive to that. People, a lot of times, are watching, here's the other thing, they're watching us before they've even come in to see us. They're watching us even before they've called us to see how do we respond. Is this going to be an okay person to call? Is this going to be a safe person to open myself up to? So when you don't even know, I mean, you're just doing your ministry, you're just living your life, whatever, they're already kind of scoping you out. Might not be fair, but it's their safety and their life, right? Who are they going to reveal themselves to? Some people come in very chaotic and have what I wrote down as a jumble of needs. So they need this, they need that. I mean, you're listening and it's like, holy cow, what am I supposed to do with all this? You're going to have to prioritize. There's a lot that's going on in your life right now. Let's pay attention to this. I think this is the most important. Do you think it's the most important? Let's start with one thing. We can't do everything at once. We can start with one thing. How are we going to begin to deal with this? They may not even know how to do that. Right? Remember that long-standing and difficult issues cannot be solved suddenly or easily. That woman who's had the problem for 25 years is not going to get a half-hour appointment and it's all going to be wrapped up. Okay? That's for sitcoms. It's not for real life. I love the show, I'm not going to be able to remember it, Madam Secretary, is that the right name, on Sunday night? I love the show. I really do love the show. But isn't it amazing that in an hour they can wrap up these worldwide crises, that have been going on for years and years, all right? I love the creativity of how they do it. I just don't like that they always manage to get it all taken care of in an hour.
Nobody likes to wait for part two.
No, and especially if they put a couple of weeks in. This is us right now. They're messing with us. If you like the show, this is us. Like 4 weeks between episodes. It's like, whoa, this is not good. Only take control if necessary. Sometimes it's necessary. If the person's really at risk, you have to take control. But in general, you want them to have the sense of control. It's their life, that they have some control over their whole life, that they have some hope. So only if necessary. Any questions? So that's general context, crisis intervention. It's first aid.
Ken,
Yes?
when you gave the situation of the person who approached you intoxicated or high,
Mm-hmm.
should you not check how they're going to get home? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you can do right. I mean, it's not like, I'm sorry, you're high. No, we can check for safety. I mean, that's still a crisis intervention. What I'm saying is don't invite them in and talk to them about their alcoholism and how it's causing a problem in their life, all right? You're not going to get anywhere. They may not even remember it. I mean, you may have been brilliant. And they had a blackout, so they didn't even hear. Huh?
In that case, you can assume they were. They don't come back.
That's right. Right. Okay. Substance abuse. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I want to say something about it because there's some thinking, and I'm not a pro or con about this. I'm going to give you an alternative view. We know that for substance abuse to really go into recovery, it means abstinence. Okay. Most people can't say, I'm an alcoholic, and it's okay if I drink once a week. They try that, okay, that's not what I'm saying, but we generally know that. But we also know that in general, most people are not going to make that switch. Okay, you sit down with the first time, and they're saying, I'm alcoholic, and you say, you should never drink again, probably not going to happen. Okay? So you may have to build some steps in of, and it's really giving them information. What would happen if you tried that you only drink on Saturdays? Okay? Now, they can buy into that, they can agree to that. What they may find out is they can't do that, and now we have another piece of information to work with, right? So even when you made the effort to limit your drinking on Saturday so it didn't interfere with work, let's say, okay? You're only going to drink on Saturday, you found out. So you're building the pieces towards them coming to the realization, I really can't manage my drinking, even though I thought I could, okay? But you're doing it with the plan of helping them, because what you start with is, where is this causing difficulty in your life? Well, I'm getting docked at work, I'm missing some days at work, I've been called in twice, and there's something been put in my file now. So this is causing a problem at work, so maybe you need to confine your drinking to the weekends and not during the week. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Now, if they're truly alcoholic, they're not going to succeed. That's not the point. The point is helping them to see that their drinking really is causing a problem and that they cannot manage it. Right? When I was working with students, you can't say to an 18-year-old who's just discovered the joy of liquor that you should stop and never drink for the rest of your life. Okay? But you can say, well, what's happening? Well, my grades are going down. I really hate the feeling of getting up in the middle of the night and finding that my head is stuck in a toilet as I'm vomiting. You know, so let's build on that. So could you drink less so that you don't get to the point that you, oh yeah, that makes sense, I'll just drink less. Well, again, if they're moving into real addiction, they're not going to be able to. That's not the point. The point is for them to help to discover the true nature of their addiction and be talking about it rather than just telling them, don't do it anymore. So that's all I'm going to say about substance abuse. Don't talk to them while they're intoxicated or on high, and you may have to work with them in steps, even though we know that the real recovery comes from abstinence. Yes?
So I have a few people in my life that could fit that bill. What happens though when they deny? Absolutely, I mean, this could be applicable to anything you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
What if they're in denial, then it's a problem? They just refuse to say no. Then it's not like, for instance, somebody I know, they call me all the time, and I can tell when they're drunk.
Right.
Because the way they talk, the way they act, totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if I bring it up later, they get angry that I bring it up.
Right.
So what do you do in that case? They just deny that they...
I keep bringing it up because this is my response, because I don't want to collude in their denial. Okay. I'm just going to, now, you can bring it up and you say, well, this is what I see. So you don't have to say, you're an alcoholic. You can say, you do call me up in the middle of the night when you're intoxicated and I don't appreciate that, so please stop doing that. Okay, I mean, referring to their behavior, okay, as opposed to like their identity.
Sure.
You don't have to diagnose them. You can, I mean, it's kind of like what happens in interventions, right? You did this, this is how it affected me. What else? Want to add anything? Okay. Domestic abuse. Okay. Let's start with this premise because we have other things floating around both in our history and in our culture. True marriage does not include the right or the permission to harm another person. Okay? True marriage does not include the right or the permission to harm another person, the spouse. Okay? And the reason I'm saying it that way is because some people, either in the relationship or outside the relationship, say, well, you're married, so you just have to live with it. Okay? I hope we're really past that, but it still comes up. It still certainly comes up between spouses. Okay? I hope it's not coming up from clergy and helpers. Right? Well, that's with marriage. You have to learn to live with that. Now, some people have grown up with that, and so they actually believe that's just what goes with marriage. If you grew up and you saw that that's the interaction between your parents, there's not much of an expectation that it's going to be different in your own marriage. So when it occurs, it's like, well, I mean, literally, they'll say to me, well, that's marriage, because that's what they've seen. That's what they assume it is. Okay? Or they'll say, I have to stay because I'm married. Okay, now, do you hear the subtlety there? I'm staying because I'm married, and therefore marriage means I have to live with this or tolerate this. And I'm telling you, but that's not marriage. Okay? Do you hear it? You don't have to stay because you're married, because that's not marriage. It's really important to hear that. I remember I was teaching in Rwanda, right? And they were saying, and I'd say, well, I'm answering you as a canon lawyer right now, okay? You're saying you have to stay in there because that's a marriage, and so you have to stay. And I'm saying, but that's not a marriage. You're not staying in a marriage because that's not what you're staying in. It's not marriage when someone believes they have power over the other person. Marriage is a partnership. If it's not being exercised as a partnership, it's not being marriage. So you don't have to stay in something that's not marriage. Our primary goal, and it may well take time, I'll tell you a story, it may well take time, our primary goal is to help them get to safety. Okay? Our primary goal isn't to maintain the marriage, because it's not marriage at that point. It's to get them to safety. Now, here's the thing. The statistic that I've read and had reinforced is the person may need to leave 7 to 11 times before they finally leave. I'll give you my story. This is not an episode in my life I'm proud of, but I've learned from it. Okay? So, in a parish where I was at, I was meeting with a woman. She was being seriously harmed. Her children had also been harmed. She had just been released from the hospital. I finally convinced her that she and her children should go to the domestic abuse shelter. And she went. And I'm like, thank God. Finally, I'm patting myself on the back. And 24 hours later, where was she? Home again. Right? What I'm not proud of is at that point I said, well, if she doesn't care any more about herself and her kids than that, then there's nothing else I can do, and I basically cut her loose. Okay? Wrong. Right? And that's why we need to know we're just getting started the first time we got them to the shelter. We got to be in this for the long haul, and the long haul is 7 to 11 or however many times it takes. It's not the first one, and that there's, okay? Because we need to understand the dynamic, okay? We're, as the outside, we're absolutely right. We want to get them to safety, but their safety in their minds is not just getting away from that person, because it also involves for them, how am I going to survive? Who's going to take care of me? Where am I going to live? All of that's true, and then there's another layer under that that we call attachment. Okay? We, as human beings, as mammals, when we're born, we need to be attached. Okay? When your baby is born, you don't say, "Well, that all went well. Good luck, you're on your own." Right? And we don't say that there's something wrong with the baby because they can't survive on their own, right? We need to be attached. We need shelter, we need nurturance, we need food. We got to have those things, and they have to be provided by someone else. And if we don't get those things, then we don't thrive or we don't survive. When people, little people, children, have not received sufficient attachment, then their expectation or their need continues to drive their behavior into adulthood. So if I haven't been well attached, I've been abused, I've been abandoned, I've been neglected as a child, that really skews my understanding of attachment in adulthood. And I'm still looking for that. So I'm in this marriage where there's domestic abuse, and I'm staying I'm not staying because I like the abuse. I'm not staying because I think this is a good thing. I'm staying because in my mind I need attachment, and I'm not sure that if I leave this person or get out of the house or however I'm framing it, how am I going to have attachment? How will I survive? So there's the practicalities of where will I live, how will I pay my bills, etc. And that's all true. But underneath that, it's much deeper. How will I survive if I don't have someone? And it's not uncommon for the spouse, and I'm going to say the man because it's often the man, but not always. The man is even saying things to the woman like, you won't survive without me. So she's already having the thought, now she's hearing it. Or, I love this one, you won't get anybody better than me. Right? Which is not exactly applause from the guy's point of view. I mean, it's kind of a stupid thing to say, you know. I'm this abusive spouse and you're not going to get anybody better than me is not exactly, you know, self-esteem, right? So there's this deep need for attachment, and this is what we have to understand. This is where the empathy comes from. And that's what I didn't have with that woman, right? I didn't have any empathy to understand what was really going on in the dynamic of how hard it was for her to leave and to stay out because of this much, much deeper psychological need for attachment, which is linked to survival. And we don't give up our survival skills, right? I told Brian today, don't serve lunch, you don't need food. That's just a mistaken notion that you think you need to eat in order to survive. What a bunch of crap. You don't need that, okay? So I'm not going to collude in that with you, so don't eat anymore, okay? And you're going in your head, well, that's crazy. I know I need food to survive. Well, these people know that they need attachment, and they're going to get it however they can get it. Becky?
I think it's also worth noting that people who are in the process of leaving that dynamic, that's the time when they are most at risk in terms of further abuse or murder from the other party.
Yes, right. Because the other party, the abuser, is also being threatened by the fact that this person may be leaving. They're losing their power. They need to reassert their power and control, because remember, domestic abuse is about power. Even if it's sexual, it's about power and control over someone else. So this person who's trying to leave is threatening their sense of power and control, so they're going to even act bigger, more forcefully, to reassert control. Right? So it's not like, it's why we have domestic abuse shelters that are unknown address and locked doors and guards. And why? Because perpetrators are going to try to get to that person. You know, I mean, we might think, well, I'll just have them stay at my house. Maybe, but maybe not, because it might not be safe for them to be at your house. They really may need to be in a safe place, protected from the perpetrator. So getting them to a safe place, recognizing their fear of survival. I have another, I didn't bring it. Another topic, I'm just going to throw a statistic at you. And it's my own statistic. So I'm moving out of domestic abuse now, and I'm moving into grief. Just to say one kind of thing. Twice in parishes, I've polled the parishes and just asked people to raise their hand if someone significant in their life has died within the last 2 years. Okay? Just said to the congregation, like during homily time. Raise your hand if someone significant in your life has died during the last 2 years. What do you think is the percentage of people who raise their hands?
50%. 60%.
Yeah, 50%. 50%. Why am I saying that? Because our congregations are grieving. I mean, just to be aware, every time you're preaching to a grieving congregation. 50% of the people in that room are grieving. And I'm using 2 years because that's a normal process for grieving a serious relationship, not because that's what most people think or expect. You know, it's like 2 months, how come you're not getting back to normal? You know, you got to get back to the way you were doing. 2 years, folks. And that's if you're doing good, normal, healthy grieving. Not if you're avoiding it, not if you're drinking your way through it, not if you're, you know, whatever. 2 years. So, learn some things about grieving and what's going on with grieving people. I mean, if I said any other statistic about the parish, and I said 50% of your congregation is doing this or has this or whatever.
Father, what would you say is the percentage of the congregation that's having significant trauma related? I've kind of thought about that, but.
So the statistic, coming to that, right. So the statistic in the United States, and I'm going to come back to this, but I just want to answer your question, is 50% of the people in the United States have a traumatic child event. I'm going to broaden that, but I want to be careful about what I'm saying in the statistic. They have some kind of child event that constitutes trauma. 50%. Which was where we were going next, so nice segue. You can get your $5 after the session. Okay, someone was, I thought I heard.
Well, I was wondering, what are those, you're probably going to get into it, what
Yep.
are those traumatic events?
Yep, that's
Broken
what,
leg.
he really did set me up. I wonder what my next topic is. Oh, it's childhood trauma.
Ken, could I just ask?
Yes.
That 50%, is there any information about the percentage of people who have multiple childhood?
Not that I've read, but I don't go around looking for it either.
Okay.
I will tell you that in the work that we have in the diocese with the childhood, with the trauma recovery program, we have done some research, and people were really showing good outcomes, and so we began to wonder, I hear this in how I'm saying it, but we began to wonder, like, are we kind of skimming off the top really healthy people? Yes, they had trauma, but we're getting the good ones or the easy ones or whatever. And when we did the research, we found that the average person in the program, the average number of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which isn't everything that we call trauma, this is a different measure. The average number in the group, for the people that were in the group, was 4 to 5. That's considered serious trauma. 1, we know, seriously affects people. So you imagine what 4 or 5 does. So it's not, doesn't really answer your question, but it says that here are people that, for the most part in the trauma recovery program, are still functioning in society. They may have had a hospitalization or they may be taking medications, but they're functioning. Most of them are employed, not all. So you have this group that's relatively healthy, relatively functioning, and they still have 4 or 5 ACEs. Okay? Now, so that, then you say, well, so that they must be not so bad after all. No, because they have serious dysfunction also going on in their lives. So there's a way that they're functioning, and then you get to this one area of their life, and it's like, it's just a mess. And it's different for different people. So, trauma. So, first let's define how I'm saying the word trauma. Trauma is an event or series of events. Series doesn't even have, it could be multiple events, okay? Coupled with vulnerability. And the result is that it interrupts human development. So I'm going along smoothly, or relatively smoothly, until something comes along, and then I go, okay? The vulnerability for the group that I'm working with is childhood, okay? Children don't have all the resources of adults. They don't have all the skills of adults. They are naturally by virtue of their age and situation, vulnerable. So, events. Events can be the classic that you would think about, which is abuse, which can be physical abuse, it can be sexual abuse, it can be verbal abuse, emotional abuse, doesn't matter what kind. It can also be neglect. I wasn't taken care of. I lived in poverty, and so it doesn't even have to be intentional. There's this sense of vulnerability, like, I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I don't know if there's going to be a parent home tonight. I don't know that I feel safe in my own house because there's so much crime going on around me and people get their houses broken into and I'm sleeping, but I'm not really sleeping because I don't feel safe in my own house, or I don't feel safe with my own parent. Abandonment. And abandonment can be intentional, like a parent moves out and leaves, but abandonment can also be in the perception of the child. So my mother is a single mom and she's working 3 jobs to try to take care of us. She's keeping a roof over her. She's doing the best she can. And one child can totally get that and kind of be supportive of mom. Mom loves us so much that she's doing this. And the next child can take it in as abandonment. Where's my mom? I need my mom and she's not ever here. Now, that's not to blame the child. It's what's going on in the child's head so that we understand that, okay, is how they're experiencing it. So abuse, neglect, abandonment, the not belonging, the not fitting in. Think about that coupled with vulnerability. See, I'm not sure. I don't fit in because of my race. I don't fit in because of my religion. I don't fit in because of my sexual orientation. I don't fit in because of my size. All of that can constitute trauma. My very first, I got to be careful about this, but my very first, when I was in my program at Western, my first assigned case was a kid who was coming in who was extremely large for his age. He wasn't obese or anything like that. He was just a really big kid. And part of it, we didn't use the word trauma at that time, but part of his situation was how he just didn't fit in, how people made fun of him because of his size. He didn't feel like he belonged with his peers because he was so much bigger than other people were. Okay? So what can be traumatic for one person may not be. I mean, one person could be getting rewarded from that. They're the star of the class because they can play every sport well, and da-da-da-da-da. But for another person, it's coupled with this vulnerability of not fitting in and not belonging, and it becomes traumatic. Divorce, obviously, it can be traumatic for children. Medical issues. So it can be the medical issue of the child, okay? It can be the medical issue of parents or mental illness of the parents or another member of the family, and so the attention of the family is focused on the child who's sick, and so the other children or some other children in the family feel abandoned or lost, and that becomes their own trauma. So there's lots and lots of things that can constitute trauma. Primarily in the perception of the child themselves. So it's not like whether you agree it should be traumatic or not. Well, that shouldn't be traumatic, right? Doesn't matter, okay? It is for them, coupled with the vulnerability. Now, why is it that not all the symptoms then develop for some people? Because the other side of the traits would be what's now being called resilience. What else is there in the child's life that supports them even in this, and interferes with this interruption or allows them to develop reasonably well? It's not to say that the event itself wasn't traumatic, but they don't develop all the symptoms of childhood trauma. And it frequently is that they had a place where they felt safe. That they did, besides this part, they also had this, which might be the neighbor that they could go to when they needed to. It might be that I always had grandma, that I got to spend 2 weeks with grandma in the summer at her place. Whatever it is, they can point to other things. I had this teacher that I could stay after school and talk to, and it was okay. They have this place where they feel safe in the midst of this other event or events or situation of vulnerability. The primary symptom or the primary sign or result, I guess is what I want to say, of this interruption is that the children learn how to avoid their feelings. Okay? They learn how not to feel. Because, one, they're children, and what's ever going on in their life is really big, overwhelming, and they simply don't have the skills to do it. I mean, think about adults having trouble dealing with big feelings, and then you say that, you know, you put a kid in that situation. Okay? They don't have the skills, and they don't have the human development to do some things that adults can do to manage intense feelings. They don't have those yet. So, unfortunately, some people say, well, if you know this about adults, why don't we just teach that to children? Well, because they don't have the capacity for that yet. It would be like, well, if chemistry is really good in high school, we should teach it to first graders. Okay, so we're going to give all the first graders, you know, an iPad and a chemistry set. Not going to work, right? They don't have the capacity to do that. And we don't say that there's something wrong with the kid because they can't do chemistry. They just don't have the capacity to do that yet. So, overwhelming feelings, and so the way for them to survive is to learn how to avoid those feelings, how to shove them aside. And we're back to the attachment again, because the child needs attachment in order to survive, but they're in this situation that another part of them is saying, get out. It's not safe. I'm being hurt, I'm being harmed, I'm being told that I'm loved, but I'm not being treated like I'm loved. And so they have all these other feelings that are anger and hurt and fear and vulnerability. What am I going to do with all those feelings? But I have to stay attached because who's going to take care of me? Now, they're not saying this consciously, but this is the situation. I have to stay attached in order to survive, but I got all this. So in order to keep this, I got to learn how not to feel all the feelings that go with that. That becomes my survival. And then that rule for survival, avoid your feelings, becomes generalized right into adulthood, and it's still the operating rule. And then how do we do that? Well, we make this list on the board. How do we do that? We drink, we gamble, we smoke, we use porn, we use the internet, we work too much, we shop, we have flashbacks, usually we make a list of 30 to 40 things, and it doesn't take very long to do it. We have ways. Everybody has their ways to avoid their uncomfortable feelings. And then those, in turn, can develop into their own problems. So the drinking works in the beginning. Right? I can just forget. I can numb for a while, and then it doesn't bother me. Or I can go just watch TV and tune everything out, and that works for a while. But then I move into adolescence, into adulthood, and those same things are now causing problems because I'm not getting my homework done because I'm watching TV so much so that I don't listen and hear what's going on in the house because it's so traumatic. Or I'm not going to drink now because it used to be that one drink was enough to numb, then it was 2 drinks, then it was 3 drinks. Now I'm not even going to wait till something happens. I'm going to just get numb before it even happens, etc., and then the alcohol becomes a problem. But until we deal with the tendency and the need to avoid feelings, those other problems, we're just going to shift. So even if they stop drinking, what's left when they stop drinking? Their feelings, right? But if I haven't learned how to deal with my feelings yet, then I've got to find another way to deal with my feelings. So one of my clients, when I worked at the psychiatric hospital, was in AA because she had stopped drinking, then she moved into drugs. Then she was in NA because she had stopped using drugs. Then she was in SA because she had started actually acting out sexually in order to take care of her feelings. And then she stopped that. And then she was in GA because gambling was the next alternative. And so now she was in AA, GA, NA, and SAA, and she exercises 5 hours a day because it was another way to avoid her feelings. So until she learns how to manage the feelings, she's just gonna move. Hers was rather dramatic, but people do the same thing. Right? All of us, I would say, and I'm not asking for anybody to announce, we have our ways that we avoid our feelings. know, we know our ways. We probably got our top 2 or 3, and then if those aren't available or aren't convenient at the time, then we got a couple other fallbacks. Things that we do to make ourselves feel better, or to soothe ourselves, or to avoid the situation. Yes, sir?
So a lot of it just, what I've found being in recovery, because I've been in recovery for 24 years, and is healthy attachments and unhealthy attachments.
Correct.
And making those priorities. And for us here, we're teaching the healthiest of attachment, which is belief in God.
Correct.
And then everything down below that, the list, so to speak.
Right.
Even to the point of, you know, a hobby,
Right.
or exercise within reason. You know.
Right. Most of the answers aren't either ors. They're doing it with some sense of prudence, or there's another word that I want, and I can't, it's not coming up. Balance, moderation, yes. Right? It's not to say to don't exercise because this woman exercises too much. It's to exercise with moderation. Right? And that we can have attachment, and in its extreme, there can be unhealthy attachments. There can really even be unhealthy attachments to God if the perception of my relationship with God is distorted by how I think about God. So, I've said to people, and they say something like, well, I don't believe in God. And I say, well, tell me about God. And they tell me about God. And I say, I wouldn't believe in that God either. I'd be running the other direction. Right? I'm not going to promote that. So let's talk about who God is, and maybe our sense of attachment or our perception of God needs to be massaged a little bit. Notice that we're not changing who God is. We're changing our perception of who God is. So, someone comes into you, and this has happened in our diocese frequently. Well, one of the ways that I know about it the most is through the Virtus program. So, you've got these volunteers, they come to Virtus because we told them that they have to do that, or they can't, work with children or be in the school or whatever, and they get triggered in terms of remembering or having stirred up their own childhood trauma. Okay? And so they come to talk to you, or me or whoever, but they come to talk to you. Okay? And they may even say something like, this is the first time I've told anybody about this. In the last year, I've had an 80-year-old woman and a 70-year-old woman, both on the phone initially, tell me on the phone what happened to them, and that I'm the first person they've ever told. Which means they've been carrying that around for a long time. So what are you going to do when they sit down and do that? Let me tell you what not to do, okay? This is a pastor in our own diocese who will remain nameless. The staff person went in, sat down with the priest, and said, I'm going to tell you something I never told anybody before. She tells him what happened to her as a child, and he said, well, grow up, get over it. And that was the end of the appointment. Okay? That is not the answer. Okay? In fact, truly, it's another trauma. Okay? He just threw another one on the pile. So that's not the answer. So overall goals, help them feel safe, because frequently this has stirred them up so they feel vulnerable, right? Help them to feel safe, give them a sense of hope. That's our goals. How are you going to do that? And you're going to get this in a handout, so you don't have to take all this as notes, okay? But if I give it to you in the handout now, then everybody reads ahead. So that's my theory of teaching, whether you like it or not. So yes, you're going to get it all, so you don't have to take notes. But listen. Strategies. 4 things that we're going to do to achieve those 2 goals. We're going to validate their experience. We're going to normalize their reactivity, their emotions. We're going to help them get grounded in the present, and we're going to help them plan for their next action. Hear the crisis stuff in there? It's what we talked about earlier. That's what we're going to do. So validating their experience. They're telling you, and they're probably at the same time saying, maybe I'm overreacting, I shouldn't feel this way, I thought I was over it. Sometimes they even said, I've done therapy, but I never told the therapist about this. They're stirred up, and we need to normalize it. But you know what? If that happened to me, I'd feel the same way. That's normalizing their reaction, right? Yes? when I talk to other people, they respond the same way that you do. This is a common way to respond. This is not unusual. You're being like other people who have had trauma. You're making it normal. There's not something wrong with them because they're crying or because they're hurt or because they're afraid. You're saying that your experience is normal. Sharon, who's the co-founder of the Trauma Recovery Program, says that trauma responses are the normal responses to an abnormal situation. If you have this abnormal situation, this is what you can expect to come. And that's what we're seeing, that's what we're hearing. Right? It's the normal response to an abnormal situation. So normalize the response. I'm sorry this happened to you. Empathy, right? That must have been very hard, right? Don't minimize their experience. So this was the negative experience that I was just talking about. Say, oh, that's no big deal. That shouldn't bother you that much. You're older now. Get over it. That was a long time ago. It's all those. You hear how dismissive they are, as opposed to normalizing their experience. Here's the other do not. Do not dig around to explore their history. And I'm going to talk out of my own experience again. I want to understand. They're telling me this story, and I'm trying to make sense of it. And so I want to ask questions because there's things I don't understand or I can't connect. They just said this, and then they said this, and I don't know how they got there. And I really, really want to understand because that's who I am, and I want to. And I think that that's going to be empathic. But from their experience, you're violating them. Let them tell what they want to tell, but you going in there and from their experience digging around isn't helpful. Let them tell however much they want to tell. Okay? That's the hardest thing for me to do, is not to go in there and for me to want to get from, see, but it's my needs, see, it's my ego. I want to understand. And that sounds really good, but that's not helpful to them. My listening and my reflecting is what's helping to them, not whether I can repeat their history or not. They may only be ready to tell certain things. You know, and that experience for me ranges from, I get one sentence, I just want you to know I was sexually abused as a kid, to the need to tell me the whole history and what happened in every event that they can remember in vivid living detail. They have different needs, and we're there to serve their needs, not our own needs.
What's the response when that's what you get? I was abused as a child.
Then I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. I wonder how it's affected you, because I would like to be of help to you. I know that there's this great program that we have in the diocese that helps people who had childhood trauma, and that might be something that you want to think about. You can leave it open if you ever want to talk about it again. I'd be glad to hear about it. See, again, they're also sounding out how we respond, okay? And I'm not sure I can think of an example right now, but if he said, so you said to me, one sentence, Steve, you know, I was abused as a child. How did I just respond to that? Did I receive that openly? Or did I say, oh my gosh, that's really bad. You know, the weather today, hasn't it just been, you know, I just gave the message. See, it doesn't matter whether he wants to talk about it anymore or not. I made it pretty clear, I don't want to talk about it, right? I don't want to hear anymore, okay? So how do we leave it open? The stance in my head is when someone is saying this kind of stuff to us, we have received this incredible gift of trust from someone. How are we going to handle that? This incredible gift that someone has shared this with, whether they've told anybody else or not, this level of personal intimacy of this part of their life that they have shared with us. How do we receive that? And they're watching that. Can we receive it? Can we handle it? Or are we going to make it really clear we don't want to hear that? We don't want to go there.
Can
Yep.
you, publicly say it must have been difficult for you, to come here today?
I can acknowledge that, but it depends on how it depends on how they're showing it. I mean, for some people, it might take them 15 minutes to get to what they started with the weather, they started with, whatever, and you're kind of like, why are you here? Because I don't think you made an appointment, I mean, it may take them. Now, other people, they're like primed, ready to go, they finally decided they're going to do it, they're going to sit down, and in the first sentence, you're going to get it. This is a different experience, but it happened more often than you think. So a student would come in and make an appointment to see me, and they'd sit down, and you get something like this. Well, and I'd say, could I say something? And they'd say, yeah, I mean, like, relief, right, at that moment. Yeah, and I'd say, you want to talk about sex, you're not sure how you're going to do it, you can't believe that you're going to talk about sex with the priest. How did you know that? Just experience, it just kind of cuts through the first two layers. It's okay, I've given them permission, I've talked about this, I've heard this before, it's going to be okay to do it, I've already named some of their feelings of anxiety, right? And then we can go into it. I wouldn't tend to do that with trauma, however. I would not do that. So, so you were abused as a child? No, I would not do that. So, first thing is validate, normalize. That's the first strategy. The second one is their reactivity, their emotions that are showing up. Help them to ground. Okay? So sometimes when this comes, it's so emotional that it's like they're overwhelmed with the feelings in their body, and grounding is like, how do you get into the present and feel safe in the here and the now, that you're really in the here and the now, the more kind of ungrounded, and I don't know whether you'll see it or not, but you need to be alert and comfortable and know that you can handle it. When basically they get so caught in the remembering that it's like they're the child again. They're not feeling themselves like an adult with you. They're feeling very unsafe. They're having all the feelings that they had as the child in the experience. They're ungrounded in the current reality because they're feeling like the child, not like an adult. Okay? In a more extreme ungrounded, I may get a sense of are they ungrounded or not, and I may look at them and I say, who are you talking to? And they said, you're my dad. Well, that's ungrounded, right? They're not talking to their dad, okay? But that may be how they're experiencing it as the moment, right? So I need to get them into the grounded, and I would say something like, I want you to look at me, and I want you to tell me again who you're talking to. And you may even watch them, it's almost like you can see them contorting, trying to figure it out, because they got two messages going into their brain. One is the one that's seeing their dad, and the other one that their vision is seeing this other guy, whoever he is, right? I want you to tell me who you see. Are you Father Ken? I mean, that would not be unusual in an ungrounded situation. Okay? They're trying to get, okay? So the kinds of questions that you can check out is, where are you now? I'm in Father Ken's office. No. Or, I'm in my bedroom. I mean, they're ungrounded, right? Where are you now? Who are you talking to? What year is this? Who's the president? Sometimes you get asked those questions, right, with your little neurological exam with your doctor, right? They want to see if you're grounded, right? If you need help, if you need to continue to do that, you want to progress from things that are simple to things that are more difficult. Okay? So I might start, let's say I was asking color. So I might say, so what color sweater are you wearing? Okay? Because it's one color. What color jacket are you wearing? What color jacket are you wearing? Then I go into, what color is the carpet? Well, look at the carpet. Whoa! I got to really think. See, we're getting out of feeling and into thinking. I don't have to think too much to say the color of your sweater. I have to really start to think and engage my brain to tell you what's the color of the carpet. Or what's the color of your shirt, because it's plaid and it's got 4 colors running through it. Or see what I'm saying? You're going to do something, and everybody has their own style. You're going to do math, okay? So you remember you're trying to get them into thinking. So what's 2 and 2? I can do that almost automatically. 4, you know, what's 4 and 4? 8. What's 8 times 6? 48. What's 48 and 92? It doesn't matter whether they get the right answer or not. That's not what you're going for. You're not doing intelligence testing, okay? You're trying to get them to engage a different part of their brain so that the emotional part of their brain can calm down by getting them into the thinking part of their brain. That's what helps to ground them in the reality, so that you can make sure that they're really here. Because when you're ungrounded, you're behaving and thinking and responding as if you're that child, okay? You don't want that child climbing into a car and driving home. If they're seriously ungrounded, you can look at it, you can say the body is an adult who's driving home, but in another way they're in their mind, and it's the child who's driving home. Not to mention whatever the emotional distress is of whether they can concentrate and focus and everything else. Is that making sense? I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you see what you might see and understand that for their safety, you need to make sure that they're grounded before they leave your office. This is the one time you can't run by the clock. Okay, and I run my life by the clock. But if I got someone in my office who's telling their trauma history, I can't say, oh, I'm sorry, your 50 minutes is up. Okay? Sorry you're not grounded right now. Have a nice time going home. All right? I mean, I may have to call the secretary and say, stall, cancel, whatever, but I have to stay with that person until they're safe, until they're grounded. You can remind them that as much as they're experiencing intense emotions right now, they will die down. One of the things that people feel when they're having intense emotions is that it feels much longer than it actually is, and that it's going to go on and never stop. Okay? And it will. Anybody who's ever experienced intense sobbing knows that it stops. Probably not under your control even, but it stops. And the other side of it is that when you have ecstasy, it stops. Right? As much as we might want it to linger, hold on, do whatever we can to make our happiness last, it naturally dissipates. Okay? Emotions naturally kind of come back to some kind of a baseline. They don't stay at intense level. If you want to help them ground, the other thing that you can do is if they're exhibiting repetitive action, you can ask them to stop that. So things like clicking their pen, twirling their hair. It's hard to do because I don't have a chair. You know, the person who's sitting there and their foot, you know, they're in the chair but their foot is running away. Right? Just, can you stop moving your foot? And they might be able to, and then it'll start again. Okay? I know this is hard. But one of the things that's going to help you is if you can just stop moving your foot. They look at you like you're crazy, like what's that got to do with all this emotion that I'm feeling? But this is an expression of that. So interrupting that helps to dissipate the emotion instead of keeping it wrapped up. Remind them in terms of grounding that as much as they're experiencing a lot of the emotion, it's related to a past event, and that's not happening right now. They're experiencing it. They may be experiencing it when they're ungrounded as if it's happening right now, and we need to remind them, you're in a different reality. You're here with me now in this office. You are safe in this office with me. That person isn't present. That event is not going on. It feels like it is because all the emotion attending to that is there. That's not what's happening right now. Let's look at the reality that you're in right now. You're here with me. Talk in a calm and soothing voice. If you get revved up, that's going to contribute to them being revved up. You being calm and soothing is going to help them. And then the other thing is, 2 other things, these are on your list. 1, help them take deep breaths. Like, you don't understand. You really think deep breathing is going to help me? Yes, I really do think deep breathing is going to help you. Okay? It's going to get oxygen to your brain and then the rest of your body, which needs it right now. So deep breathing and eye contact. So a tendency when you're ungrounded can be to close your eyes Sharon talks about as if they're seeing the movie in their head, right? They're seeing the movie of their life or the event. So opening your eyes helps them to be getting other sensory input besides what's going on in the brain in the movie, right? I'm seeing something else besides the movie. So keeping their eyes open, giving eye contact, asking them to look at you to get eye contact. And then helping them plan what's the next action, both the next action immediately. What are you going to do when you leave here? I'm going to stop at Starbucks and get a cup of coffee and sit there for 15 minutes and just let myself calm down before I go to work. Yep. Okay. What are your plans when you leave here? I'm going to go home, I'm going to make supper, I'm going to whatever. Yes. If they don't know, wait till they got a plan. You don't want to just send them off. Okay. What are you going to do next? And then the what are you going to do next would be in the bigger context of what are you going to do next for your self-care for this trauma that now has been expressed. I'm going to make another appointment with my therapist. It's been too long. You know, I'm going to find a therapist. You should have a list ready, folks. You should have a list ready that you can put in their hands. Here are 3 people that are really good at handling childhood trauma. Okay, that I'll get back to you in a week. Asking them if they have a therapist. Do they feel safe going home? Do they feel safe leaving alone? Or do we need to have someone come and pick them up? Do you need a friend to come and meet you? Do we need to call your spouse and let your spouse know that you've had a difficult day? Right? So you're going to be helpful here. What are their next steps to make sure they're safe? What are their next steps to do in terms of taking care of themselves and dealing with the trauma? In the handouts that I'm going to give you today, there's a whole lot of other stuff that kind of introduces you to the impact of trauma, what's called signs of unresolved trauma, and then what we do in the trauma program in terms of how we begin to treat it, just so you have that information, but that takes too long and I want to get on to other issues. Do we want to take a break? Yeah. Violence, yeah, right? Okay. So 3 minutes?
So long?
Normally I wouldn't give you that long.
Yeah.
Hi, John.
Oh, okay.
Huh?
Yeah, it was Friday night, so they just got her. And then you get home and you start up and see.
And they go somewhere.
Working with them, actually, I'm going to see Dow tomorrow. I was a consultant with them again, so that was fun.
But they're real.
10 years ago, I was 10 years ago. Terry Williams did that production.
Sure. My Saturday was at 2 o'clock.
Actually, yeah, down in town. So it's still this weekend and next weekend
So nobody.
Yeah, all of them.
So it's friends.
Yeah.
I knew he was on to something.
His wife comes usually, but she's usually at 4 o'clock. She's usually there.
I remember those days.
It's been a while. Since I've seen
Yes, and truthfully, our schedule. Nothing is
Where
planned.
has your worship been next year?
St. Joe. We were ordained as bishops. Father Richard needed help.
Yes.
The clipboard, everybody sign our clipboard?
I think so. Not positive. You almost have to do a head count.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Hey Brian, that's why you should just put on there, everybody's here.
What's that?
That's why you should just wrote on there, everybody's here.
Everybody's here?
We're on the second, yeah, so Ted Lidmer was the HIPAA compliance officer for children's services. He'd done way more forms than we had ever done personally or whatever. And then he came up with more than I mean, even yesterday's meeting, we were on the third review, but he also thought it was one more.
I just remembered, I never did the refrigerator at the time.
Oh, yeah, you set a date when, she told me that, she needs 24 hours to get there. So like, we're gonna do on a Friday, I need to let her know by before Thursday.
Yeah, I sent back that, I sent that much to send, something like that, but can we, I'd like to pick them up on a Thursday.
Okay.
So if possible.
Really?
Yeah, I would say,
Where? At work or? The company came in. JLO lost the contract.
Right.
Let us all know that
Right,
we wanted to
right.
apply for a job. So more than welcome.
Yeah.
So we all had to apply for a job. Actually, that's 3/4.
The families.
Offers. Some of it.
Like you brought this on yourself.
No, I'm like me, I've got 20 years experience in maintenance. And they're paying me. And they're paying me. That's a mechanical. An hourly wage and hours. I know some of them are very good. But looking at the job assignment, job. Especially some doctors an entry level. Getting paid big. But where other people, they put them in charge. They offered him the job that I thought I should have been off. And cut his pay. I was just
She writes them.
How is, Father John?
Another like three.
Father John.
He was just kind of,
Well, officially, it's
picking up, what he was covering goals primarily, would help it.
Signed up for it.
Only all three.
Father works out for him.
I'll start talking fast.
But he's not working me.
The good news is it's written down, so it's not like,
Really? He knows you're at like 12 different parishes.
Baptism, confirmation, first annulments. I mean, he's a pastor, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I think he knows the situation. That's the reason I'm asking. The girls that were at the first meeting, they were going to do it afterwards. You guys, that's what you got. You go back for the texts. It was like, we have the church, mainly following the text that I think the back finally responded saying, I will do first session in my office and then yeah, so maybe this Saturday, Thursday, or Friday?
Thursday, yeah.
There's a Latin mass voice. She's got to work on it. We go to the church. The church has groups here. I do this. They got the same thing. But yeah, I went home translating some things for me.
All right, are we ready, guys?
is that it?
All right.
I wasn't taking this. Okay, so we'll do pastoral care regarding sexual orientation, and then we'll end with the highlight of suicide, okay? So that way everybody will be ready to go when it's time to go. Linger or anything like that. So, I'm doing a specific topic. I'm doing pastoral care of youth, okay, and young adults dealing with issues regarding sexual orientation. So here's the phrase that I'm building on from the U.S. Bishop's document. Homosexual men and women must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Okay. I worked with a community-based group dealing with youth and sexual orientation. This is one of the things that they showed us. On a spectrum of one extreme in families where there is rejection of the youth and I don't even know what word to put down here, embrace, okay? The middle is acceptance. On this spectrum, the middle is acceptance, okay? And I don't have all the statistics written down because it's in a different presentation. But if we can help families, parents primarily, but families move from rejection to acceptance, we would put maybe tolerance here, okay? In fact, that would probably be a better way to describe it. Tolerance and acceptance. Okay? So I'm not even going here. Okay? I'm going here. Okay? If we can help families move from rejection to tolerance. So rejection would be, you're not my kid anymore. I never want to see you again. You're out of the house. If you're in college, I'm not going to pay for college anymore. I mean, out and out rejection. If if we can move from rejection to tolerance, these are the kinds of statistics. Don't write down the statistics, I don't have them right, but I want to give you the idea. Suicide decreases 80%. Sexually transmitted diseases decreases 1,000%. What else is there? Suicide decreases 50%. I mean, okay, just from here, just to move this far. We're not talking about you're marching with me. We're not talking about you're resigning at my marriage. Okay, we're just talking about, can you tolerate their existence? Can they still come home? Are you talking to them as opposed to ignoring them? If you can move people from rejection to tolerance, it's a public health issue. Okay? That's why the community group was formed. It's a community health issue in terms of what's happening to youth. Okay? Gay and lesbian youth hear, whether directly or in messages around them, that they are dirty, that they are no good, that they are unlovable. 30% of attempted suicides among youth are related to sexual identity issues. Okay? They suffer depression, self-anger, self-harm. This is true whether they've actually come out or whether they're even trying to figure it out. So they don't even know the answer yet. Okay? They may be trying to figure it out, but it stirs so much because this is about identity, about who I am. Okay? It's also rooted or founded on a huge amount of fear because the coming out process, coming out meaning that I am declaring to people how I understand myself. I'm letting it be known. I'm saying it. Okay? That the coming out process is so fraught with danger, and it's individual in the sense that each person I tell is a whole other episode or experience. Okay, so I can't say, I told you and it was okay, so then I can tell you and I know it's going to be okay, because I don't know. Okay, and I might have an idea, because I've probably been watching for a long time, and if you're telling jokes about faggots, I'm probably not going to tell you in the first place, okay? But I've been watching. But even when I think that I figured it out, it doesn't mean that's the way it's going to go. Either way. There may be acceptance where I was ready for rejection, and there may be rejection when I thought that it was not going to be a big thing. Okay? But every one is like trial and error. So every one. And the more significant the relationship, the more dangerous it is from the youth's point of view to tell. Because I have more to lose, right? It's more of a threat to lose a significant relationship than it is to tell a stranger. So the phenomenon on campus was students were totally out on campus and totally not out in their families. Why? Because I can tell a stranger, I can go into the grocery line and say to the person next to me, I'm gay. So what if they don't like me or like me, okay? Doesn't matter. But I start telling significant relationships with the possibility of being rejected, there's a lot bigger threat. So the coming out process is long and drawn out. The average age for coming out, what do you think the average age for coming out now is in the United States?
25.
12. 12 years old. Okay? In one generation, that statistic changed from 25 to 12.
But is that realistic?
What do you mean?
12 years old?